Cultural Resource Protection by Jeff Grignon. My name is Jeff Grignon. I work as Cultural Resource Protection for Menominee Tribal Enterprises in the Menominee Tribe of Wisconsin. My Menominee name is Pamapame. I'm of the Wolf, Deer, and Dog clan. And I've been in and around these cultural sites for over 49 years. When I start presentations, I always like to get everybody oriented. Everything about finding archaeological sites on the reservation can be tied to the glacial action of the last glacial episode in Menominee, in northeastern Wisconsin. We basically had the Laurentide ice sheet move down the basin of Lake Michigan and then advanced westward through the reservation here on Menominee, heading westward across the reservation about roughly 90,000 years ago. That glacial action then retreated back across the reservation to the east and then re-advanced to a point of this on the purples on the map here. I'm using this highlighter here. At roughly 30,000 years ago. This yellow highlighted area is basically the area where the most interesting archaeological sites are found on the reservation. These are stone sites, very hard to date. According to, a lot of times I have to use some of the Menominee stories or legends that were passed down through generations very meticulously. Each word was passed down. You can basically date these stories roughly. What I call it, the really old stories are the ones where only partial parts of the stories survive, and the more modern stories are the ones where the wording is pretty much intact. In these really old stories, they talk about some of these core legends of Menominee. And along this highlighted area here that I put on the map, you'll find stone sites that are representations of those early, very old Menominee stories. At current time, I have 3 sites based on the edge of where the glacial push, that second push in the highlighted area here, that potentially could be many thousands of years old, which beg for more work in the future. But as far as the glacial action, that second push, the glacial action then retreated in a series of pushes and retreats back across the reservation off to the east. Then the glacier re-advanced one more time, roughly along the second highlighted area here, and then finally retreated, depositing glacial Lake Oshkosh on the eastern side of the reservation, eventually forming the Legend Lake areas down in the southeast corner here. And it retreated back north. Now, at present on the Menominee Reservation, this number is actually a little old. On the top of the slide here, there's actually 1,232 sites, cultural sites identified on the reservation. These include prehistoric summer burial garden raised garden bed sites associated with the trail system. You got medicine areas associated with these summer areas. We have one wild ricing settlement identified here on the reservation. And then you get into the historic area. Now in Menominee, basically anything from thousands of years ago to roughly 1850 would be deemed or named a prehistoric site. Anything from 1850 to roughly 1950, 1960 would be a historic area. That would qualify for protection here on the reservation. Now you get to the 1850 era, you get the historic logging and rail camps, pine era, hardwood era camps. You have many homesteads and farmsteads on the reservation. And then you have the rock formations, number 4. These rock formations are most of them, a majority of them are located on that first area I highlighted on the map, that second glacial push on the reservation. And on the reservation, we have the Wolf River corridor here, where there's no management activities for Menominee tribal enterprises allowed within this corridor due to the amount of cultural sites within that corridor. That it's a quarter-mile corridor along the Wolf River. We also have one compartment that's out of management area. Here. Compartment 223. These areas are not included in my work as cultural resource protection for Menominee tribal enterprises. These areas, all the cultural sites aren't counted within the amount that I mentioned earlier, the 1,232 sites. Those 1,232 sites are located in all the areas that are within Menominee Tribal Enterprises management area, which would be the white areas east and west of the Wolf River. Now, as I was amassing this total amount of cultural sites, it was probably roughly around 700 sites. I started looking at them on the map. There was no rhyme or reason, no context could be found for why these sites, why they settled where they did. As I continued to find sites on the reservation, I realized there was a need to identify the trail systems, the ancient trail systems that were used to get into these areas. So, doing a lot of research on the reservation, I reached out to some individuals, very dedicated private individuals who, in their retired time, take the time to try to identify these ancient trail systems off the reservation. And luckily I've tied in with this group, and through their research, they have found that through the historical record and visiting sites and finding these trail systems, they've managed to come up with a description of the the main trail systems here in northeastern Wisconsin. Through their research, they talked about a main trail system south of Chicago. Here on the slide, in the highlighted areas here, there's a main trail system that runs south of Chicago, runs east and west from coast to coast, west coast to east coast. This trail, a main trail system, branches off of this northward through Chicago, Milwaukee area, up to Fort Howard and Green Bay. From there, it turns northwestward onto the reservation where one trail splits and runs up to the east side of Lake Superior, crossing somewhere around Sault Ste. Marie and heading north into Canada. There's a second trail system that runs northwestward up through Wisconsin, up to northern Minnesota, makes a route back to the lakeshore of Lake Superior, and then runs north into Canada. And north of Lake Superior, there's also another trail system that runs east and west from coast to coast. So these are the main trail systems in northeastern Wisconsin here. I also have a third trail system, but I'll mention that a little bit later, that I'm currently tracking. Now, an interesting point about these trail systems is on the reservation here, one trail system runs northeast and one other trail system runs northwest. Now, the odd thing about that is that this northwest trail system runs not to the lake to the present lake shoreline of Lake Superior. It runs to the old shoreline of glacial Lake Duluth, which could give you context on the dating of that southwest trail system. Because it runs to the ancient shoreline of glacial Lake Duluth, you could infer that possibly this trail system is many tens of thousands of years old, possibly 16,000 years old, which of the trail systems that are on the reservation, this northwest trail system is the oldest trail system that I've seen based on the evidence of the cultural sites on the Menominee Reservation. Now, part of my work has been to GPS points on sites. So here's the latest as of September. Sites that have been GPSed with a center point on the site. You're beginning to starting to see groupings of sites, possibly giving me evidence on where to possibly locate more of the side trail systems off the main trail systems. I did manage to GPS the northwest trail system I talked about on the last slide, the one that runs on the west side of Lake Superior. It's represented as the purple line here. It runs through the reservation from north to south. Hopefully by next year, I'll have the trail system that runs on the east side of the Wolf River, have that mapped and GPSed. And like I said, I'm working on a third trail system that runs westward. Now, along this trail system, depicted in this pink or purple color, you begin to see groupings of sites. The context of the sites start to come into clearer focus. Here north of Kashina, I've done one section where I track the sites. As you can see, a lot of the sites start to group around the trail system. You can kind of see a pattern of dating of sites. The sites a little bit further off the trail are older sites, according to what has been found in the sites. These are roughly 1700s. These sites, and the sites closer to the trail system, the evidence of what artifacts are within the sites point to these sites as more of the 1800 sites, in the 1800s. But you can see definite groupings along the trail. Once I laid the trail system down on my home maps, my hand-drawn maps, I was able to get the context came into clear focus. So it's been well worth the effort. I've been tracking the trail system since probably 2012. So once I was able to lay that trail system onto the map, the trails that I do have mapped, the context began to show itself. Now, on the southern part of the reservation, I did track the sites a little bit off the reservation just to see if I could find the evidence, even though the area has been modified by human activities. But I was definitely able to find at least the point where the trail splits. The trail system on the left side of that split in the trail system, the left trail runs to Shawano, Wisconsin, and the right stem of that trail system runs to Shawano Lake, which would have been termed the Ricing Trail by Menominees in the stories. Now, as far as identifying the trail systems, I'm lucky if I have such an indentation as you see here. Because of the activity and travel on the trail systems, do find areas like this, mostly on the hillsides, from traffic going up and down the hills. But I do occasionally find on the flat areas. A good portion of the trail system is currently part of the road system now. That's pretty much due to when I was identifying the Pine era logging camps. The modern road system wasn't in place. You're talking Pine era camps would be mid to late 1800s. So I see evidence of that they were using the trail system to access these Pine area camps along the river systems. It wasn't until the hardwood era that the modern road system was developed based off of where the train tracks were laid. But these early Pine era camps used the trail systems, and it's natural for a good trail to be converted into a road. And if I don't have one of these two characteristics, uh, identifying the trail systems, then I have to resort to looking at soil compaction in the forest, because potentially you could have 16,000 years worth of foot traffic and animal traffic also on these trail systems. So there's very good soil compaction that the effects are lingering into today, where there's very few plants grow on there, very few trees, if at all, any of the trees grow on there. Protocols used on the cultural sites are, as stated here, flag surface features, identify boundaries. Whether that identification of boundaries comes from either features on the site, artifacts, could be metal detecting, or random shovel probes. Once I have the boundaries, a buffer area is determined. Buffer area is GPSed. Center point within the site is GPSed. It's identified with its own unique numbering. A sketch map is made of all surface features, inventory of artifacts within the site, and then I use a written summary of each site, what I've seen, what you know, based off of Menominee stories that I've studied. Um, does that come into play? You know what I mean? It's a personal written summary of the sites. I inventory and record plant species within the buffer area in case I can identify if I can identify any changes in the plant habitat types that these occupants did long ago. And I do see evidence even as far back as a couple of 100-year old prehistoric sites, where there are certain garden areas, medicinal garden areas, that are still active on these sites. And then Wisconsin archaeological site inventory form is filled out, but this form will only be stored at Menominee Historic Preservation. It's not forwarded to Wisconsin, to Madison, Wisconsin. It's kept here on the reservation. And then all field data is entered and stored at Historic Preservation here in Kashina. I want to get into quickly a little bit of the Menominee stories about the raised bed areas, because it's been a main focus of mine to identify these cultural sites, these raised bed areas, in part to change the historical record, because Menominees have been identified as um, moving around and hunters and gatherers, that type of thing. But we were very active in the agricultural area. Now, there's an old story that talks about the three sisters. Three sisters could be corn, bean, squash, could be whatever that grouping or clan or subclan or grouping, that type of food. That is a specialty for that group. It doesn't always mean corn, beans, and squash, but the story talks about how Menominees observed this food that was growing within their raised beds or raised gardens, and they realized that in the case of corn, beans, and squash, the corn was the true elder of the community, and the Menominees were only a part of this community. They weren't presiding over this community. They were only active members of the community. The corn was a true elder. The corn directed how the plants grew according to how this garden could contribute to the greater ecosystem around it. Eventually, Menominees took this knowledge and this observation and applied it to the forest areas, began actively managing the Menominee Forest or northeastern Wisconsin. Like I said, this has been an emphasis of mine to find these ancient garden areas. At present, there are a whole series of different types of techniques that were used in these ancient raised bed gardens. It's a whole series. I believe, according to what I have preserved out on the forest, there's a whole series, roughly 10, maybe 12 different types of series of techniques that were used in these garden areas. I think it has to, according to the evidence, I think it has to do with the changing climate. They're slightly altering the way they did things, and possibly in the future, I hope that some type of dating system will be able to be established on this whole series of raised bed gardens. Now, these garden areas are based off of elder plant concept that I call, that were taught in the stories and by tribal elders. It's based off of, you have the elder plant here. We'll put the center one as the elder plant. This elder plant communities include many elements that isn't often identified when you're talking about plants. You might have the plants within the gardens, um, corn, beans, and squash, sunflowers, but you also have the the wild plants that are on the edge of the gardens are included within the communities. You have the insects that are included in these communities. You have the fungi below ground. You have the bacteria and viruses below ground that are parts of these communities, and you also have the animals and humans within these elder plant communities that were identified within the garden areas. Now, within this elder plant concept, they realized that you have the elder in the center here, the elder plant, which would be the corn. Then you have the beans and squash on the inner edge, or inner part of the community, that were the mainstays of the community that occupied that community. And then you have the wild plants on the outer edges of the gardens, which were just as important for the garden areas. These plants came and go. They would come and go within this community here in the garden areas based on need. So you have the concept of, you have the elder plant community within the garden area. You have elder plant communities within the forest or prairie regions of northeastern Wisconsin. So all these communities are much like communities we have today, like Shawano, Kashina, Green Bay, Milwaukee. And within these communities, these outer edge plants that I talked about within the community were shared back and forth. That's why they talked about them coming and going. So it's an incredible amount of sharing going on within the ecosystem. It's not plants against other plants. In order for them to survive this long and flourish, there had to be cooperation. Now, within the whole point of the raised garden areas is the garden was placed on top of the ground. Menominees did not believe in disturbing the sacred underground, they call it. So the garden areas were put, basically in the beginning, they were put on top of the present soil in order for the plants to be able to access, basically plug into the below ground mycelia below ground. This the quicker you could plug your plants and plant roots into this system, the safer they were. Um, a lot of the present day agriculture involves disturbing the soil, plowing, um, planting, but then you have the all the extras that you have to add to the garden area, and the protection isn't always the best. But the Menominee basic concept was to put your garden on the well-developed sacred underground, plug your plants in as quick as they could during the growing season, and that would provide safety for the plants. Because you got to remember, you got to realize that when they started these agricultural areas, the climate was much different than it is today, and you're still coming off, the effects of that glacial retreat. So climate change was very fast and furious. Now, if you focus, I always tell students and those to focus on that little zone of area along the edges of the plant roots. This is called the rhizosphere. I always like to say that's where the magic happens with the plants. Now the Menominees were, like I said, plugging their food plants in into these garden areas. The quicker they could get access to the below ground elements like the fungi, the mycelia, the good bacteria and viruses, the more safer the plants, the better the survival rate of the plants were. In the stories, it talks about how the plants produce certain types of medicines when the plant breaks the soil from the seed, breaks through the soil, unfolds its leaves, and begins pulling in the sunlight from the sun, from the Great Spirit. In the story that talks about the sun as a Great Spirit, pulls in that sunlight, and the plant will immediately stop producing the type of medicines that it does, or chemistries, as science would say. As soon as it begins photosynthesis, the medicines change to different types of medicines that are produced and sent through the leaves back down through the plant into the root system, down into the zone around the roots. Now, these medicines are a type of communication or a call to the good elements below ground in the sacred environment, calling them to the root systems in order to occupy every part of the root system on the outer edge of the root system. It's a communication. The quicker that communication can get to the good bacteria and viruses, the better for the plant. If the bad bacteria and bad viruses gain a foothold on these root systems, then your survival rate diminishes. Um, I talked about how they took that elder plant concept and applied it to the forested areas. Um, they realized that after that glacial retreat, um, there's stories that talk about how areas became very brushy and hard to manage or hard to get through. The hunting was bad, and they talk about how they had viewed Menominees had viewed how the Plains Indians were using fire on the prairies. Um, Vast areas, huge um, strings of fire on the prairies. These stories got back to the Menominees, and I do believe that based off these stories, um, one in particular talks about how the origin of fire for Menominee. It talks about how Menominees had to go to a cave and 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 basically steal the use of fire from the person in the cave because they wouldn't give any of the fire or the knowledge to the Menominees, so they had to take it. That's based on one particular tribe in the Western Plains that wasn't forthright in offering the knowledge of the use of fire. But these stories, if we can date the stories in the trail system, I do believe that these raised garden areas and the use of fire were um, first introduced to northeastern Wisconsin, several thousands of years ago. You can see evidence on the Menominee Forest of the use of fire off the trail systems. Uh, you can see this kind of purplish trail system that I GPSed here. You can see the origin of point of fire here, kind of the fire spread here. Now the reddish areas on this map um, are white pine areas, heavy white pine area, and the lighter colored here on the outer edges, that's hardwood or leaf trees. Now you can see the classic spread of fire, most likely lit off the trail system here. Origin point would be here. And you can see the fire spread. Classic example. Especially when I look at this because, with the experience of Western fires and Southern fires, it's a classic, very good evidence of the use of fire off the trail systems. Now that management, these fire effects, with the use of fire in northeastern Wisconsin and on the Menominee Reservation in particular, you can see the fire effects lasting 100 to 150 years with the plant communities here on the reservation And the fire effects for the trees, or the stands of trees, are up to 800 years. That evidence is on the forest. Now, all along the trail system, you see evidence of possible stand origins based on use of fire off these trail systems. That evidence is still here on the reservation. Now, the reservation in 1914, like this map shows a very different looking reservation than it is today because of the absence. We haven't been able to do large scale burning on the forest. So the reservation is changing. You know, when this map was 116 years ago, so we're starting to see the effects of different plant groupings because of the absence of fire. Now, according to the elders, he talks about when with the use of fire, a lot of the burn regimes that were used here in northeastern Wisconsin were based on that elder plant community concept. Certain diverse plant groupings were kept in place by the use of fire, not only on the reservation, but all of northeastern Wisconsin. So it's an area-wide management, intensely managed for possibly thousands of years. You can see evidence of this on the reservation here, where this um, this northeastern Wisconsin, this management is ecosystem wide, much like the raised garden areas where I talked about the plants plugging in to the garden areas, into the sacred underground below. It wasn't management for just what that plant could do. It's what that plant's role in helping the health and vitality of the region around it. So it's a much bigger picture than just your needs with that particular plant. And that's about all I have here. So I thank you for listening. And hopefully next year we can get out on sites to actively see some of these areas. I thank you again. We'll end it.